Well, good evening, everyone. It's 6:03 in Central Time. I'm living here in the far northeast corner of Alabama. So it's good to connect with so many people across the nation, and I think maybe across the ocean for some visitors that come here. My name is Robert Farrell, and tonight I get the honor of hosting the One Spirit gathering on the topic of rehumanizing. And you're invited to join me if you have a candle, to light a candle as we open this sacred space. Welcome the light among us and share our light with the world. In this dialogue about rehumanizing, what I would like to attempt to do tonight is to share some various thoughts from different perspectives, from Sufism to Franciscanism to some of the sciences like social psychology and sociologists and many others. However, the most important part of what we're going to try to do tonight is open things up to get your thoughts and ideas on this topic. And I'm going to present this in the way of 4 or 5 different little segments, depending on how much time we have. And after each segment, we'll give a couple of minutes for reflections. And I'd really like to try to get each of you to share at least one takeaway from each segment. And then at the end, we'll go a bit deeper into your ideas and thoughts and provide a way that you can share your ideas even after tonight. And I'd also just like to point out that the content of each of these little segments that we'll touch on this evening are going to overlap one another a little bit. And it's helpful because when we can touch on knowledge from different angles, then we can develop a better understanding. We all have recognized that the level of social discourse continues to decline throughout the United States and around the world. And it's so good that we are coming together to understand how we can respond and rehumanize a world that contains these constant voices of dehumanizing. Rehumanizing empowers the courage to embrace our humanity. And this rehumanizing is an opportunity to reignite creativity and connection, because it's through connection and creativity that we manifest that truth, goodness, and beauty in the world. And I know it's only together that we can rehumanize. And I'd also like to recognize that there's no doubt that history itself goes 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. But, you know, thank goodness there always seems to be a net gain. And when a new level of maturity is found, there's almost an immediate and strong instinct to pull backward to the old and familiar. But thankfully, within society at large, there's always a critical mass, a few people who carry that momentum toward greater inclusivity and greater compassion and greater love. And it's always been one of the things to me that I thought One Spirit was all about, was being that leaven, that critical mass, those few people that carry the momentum forward. And our higher levels of evolution are always a movement toward greater unity. Along the way, there's going to be differentiation and complexity. But paradoxically, that increased complexity moves life toward a greater level of unity. And as I have studied this topic at various times over the decades and tried to understand why and so forth, I really came to feel like there's at least a threefold response that we should build together around a short-term response, an intermediate, and a long-term response. So I found 3 R words to go along with rehumanizing to identify these. I'm going to put them in the chat section so that we can kind of hold those as we work through this evening. The first is the short term, repair the negative effects of dehumanizing. And in the intermediate term, respond non-violently to the current dehumanizing that we see in our social discourse. And third, in the long term, how do we recreate a culture rich in human virtue, rich in value, and respectful of that human dignity? So those 3 are in the chat section for you to think about as we go through this evening and work through some of these different topics. The first segment is I would like to just kind of acknowledge that demoralize and demonize are words that are used interchangeably with dehumanizing. And we don't have to necessarily draw solid lines between those words when we hear them. In this first section, what I'd like to us to approach and see what we can gather out of this is demonize is that a unique verb. It affects both the subject and the object of a statement. And I'm not talking about grammar here. More than anything, I'm talking about a claim about human relationship. Because it's when a person demonizes another person, that's when it's an attack to remove the other person's humanity. In other words, to make them a demon. And this thought from the Sufi master, Kabir Helminski, he talks about the word hu, H-U, in that Arabic language, which really, as he translates it, is divine essence, or you might think of it as the indwelling presence of God. And what Kabir is trying to help us understand is that dehumanizing another person is an attempt to remove their who. And without who, a person doesn't have divine essence. And the noun that we have for that is demon. So demonizing and dehumanizing is a form of violence. And it shouldn't be our social norm, because we can't relate. We can't survive if we can't relate. So going just a little bit more with this, demonizing is dehumanizing. And because we are all part of humanity, demonizing one person, just one person, makes a claim about all of us, that we collectively are becoming less human. Thus, the person attempting to demonize another unconsciously demonizes themselves. And this, most often occurs at an unconscious state, that state where a person isn't truly aware. And as a result, humanity further suffers from a declining collective consciousness. And we can't survive by relating to others in a fog of awareness and not relating the broader impact and not realizing the broader impact. And in the moment, it might feel like lifting to one person, but it really becomes detrimental to the whole. So demonizing can be analogous to a social cancer, one that manifests in many parts of the body of humanity. And each of us can benefit from conscious efforts not to demonize and to speak out when others do. Yeah, disagreement's healthy. Disagreement is a part of human discernment, and it's necessary so that human relationships can flourish. But nothing can flourish when it has disease. or diseased. So we have come together, and we really have in the past, we've come together to establish healthy, conscious moral norms. And I believe on this issue, we can come together to create a moral norm where demonizing isn't acceptable, where disagreement is nonviolent, and where our collective consciousness strengthens relationships, and where humanity then flourishes. So after hearing this about who and what demonizing does, let's take about 2 minutes of silence just to sit with that. And then I'll invite you to share, what's coming up for you. What's your one takeaway from this? Let's just rest in the silence for about 2 minutes. I'd like to recognize that the different aspects of this topic can be really heavy sometimes, even in our self-reflections. So let's all just take a deep conscious breath together. If you feel like you want to shake it out a little bit so it doesn't feel so heavy. And if you'd like to, you can share in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. And we'd love to hear what's your one takeaway on this topic of demonizing and who. Go ahead, Susie.
Thank you. Thank you for presenting this. I find that if I tend to dehumanize someone, it's because something's scaring me. And I'm putting up, I think, a protection instead of trying to see the person that might be scaring me or the group of people that might be scaring me for where they're coming from. So thanks for this conversation. The other thing that comes up for me is, I think I'm going to mispronounce it, but the word Ubuntu,
Yeah.
I am because we are. That if I can keep that in mind, but if I'm scared, I can't often keep that in mind, that it's helpful, especially if it's a interpersonal conflict.
Thank you. Anyone else? Diane, please.
Thank you. I think my takeaway, Robert, is real appreciation for the reminder that demonizing or dehumanizing someone is an expression of violence, is actually a form of violence. And and in that sense has ethical as well as personal and psychological ramifications.
Indeed. Thank you. Anyone else would like to share a takeaway? Sonia, please.
I'm very new here to One Spirit, and when I was thinking of how we are, this society, this culture, this generation dehumanizes, I was thinking of the very materialistic society we live in, where nearly all businesses, not all, but very many, where humans are commodities. How much can you make for me? How much can you, the bottom line is the only thing that kind of matters, even if there is some kind of, token effort to see them as humans. If they don't perform in a way that matches the bottom line. And in that way, it's so predominant in Western society, this dehumanizing, which I guess the next level then is to say it's demonizing. And I think of how it's sort of bred in the bone, and it feels very, very unsettling in that way.
Thank you for sharing, Dottie, and then we'll move on to our next segment.
Hi, Robert. Thank you. It isn't usually my style, but just a couple of hours ago, I was demonizing someone. And I don't usually say fuck you, but that's what I wanted to say to this person. And it's quite startling how when you're tired or frustrated or whatever, you can slip into the dehumanizing part or the demonizing part.
Thank you for sharing. Let's see. Work on a couple of technical things here, if I can get them to cooperate. James Baldwin tells us, I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain. For me, that opened up a different layer of compassion. How was I going to be able to recognize that those people that are demonizing or dehumanizing, even when I do it, it can be a form of or a way of avoiding the pain. And you cannot easily get to love when you begin with threats and appeals to fear. The driving energy then is completely wrong. However, history is continually graced with people who have been transformed and somehow learned to act beyond and outside their self-interest for the good of the world. People who clearly operated by a power larger than their own. This next segment, I just want to share with you 3 quotes and then a video that I've found very helpful. The first quote is from Thomas More. It says, the soul. He's really talking about the same thing that Kabir Helminski talked about in Who. But Thomas More says, the soul longs for love that is unconditional, unending, and without a tangible object. Dehumanizing signals a loss of soul. Eugene Cho says that be careful not to dehumanize those you disagree with. In our self-righteousness, we can become the very things we criticize in others and not even know it. It's touching on that unconscious level that I mentioned earlier. And the wonderful Brene Brown, wonderful in my mind anyway. She says, there is a line, it's etched in dignity. dehumanizing others crosses that line. Dehumanizing always starts with language and followed by images. So instead of me continuing to quote Brene, I'd like to share with you a 5-minute video where she's being interviewed, well, in dialogue with Marie Forleo. And just a note of caution, if you have young ears in the room, there is some language in this that might not be appropriate for them. So I'll give a 20-second count so that there's time if you want to change your room organization a little. And then after this video, we'll take a couple of minutes of silence and then hear everyone's takeaway.
What I want to move on to is people are hard to hate close up, move in. This concept of rehumanizing, not dehumanizing, it got me in the heart. It got me in the gut, especially what's happening now in our world. There's something that you wrote, and I want to read it because it is the core of ways that I've struggled in the past few years, not knowing how to approach conversations, not knowing how to invite people into a conversation, and to really take a hard look at my own biases and my own angers and how I would like the world to be. You wrote, if you are offended or hurt when you hear Hillary Clinton or Maxine Waters called a bitch, a whore, or the C word, you should be equally offended and hurt when you hear those same words used to describe Ivanka Trump, Kellyanne Conway, or Theresa May. When the President of the United States calls women dogs or talks about grabbing pussy, we should get chills down our spine and resistance flowing through our veins. When people call the President of the United States a pig, we should reject that language regardless of our politics and demand discourse that doesn't make people subhuman. I want that to be everywhere.
God, it's so hard.
It's so hard.
It's like,
but it's so
I want to take your
important.
iPad and just like research or heal myself. Yeah, it's hard as hell because let me tell you about dehumanization and my concern about it, and as I've witnessed it. Dehumanization is a very slippery, dangerous process. And I'll tell you where it starts. We are actually hardwired neurobiologically to not hurt one another. It goes against our human nature to treat each other, to be violent, rape, torture, degradation, humiliation. It actually goes against who we are. And we're wired that way to protect the species. We're a social species. We need each other. We're completely dependent on each other. The process of dehumanization is the process that we use to slowly, primarily using words and images, nothing more. Dehumanization is the process of slowly moving people out of, I want to use this table as an example, or this coffee. So here's a group of people that we want to harm. It's a group of people that we hate, a group of people that a leader has told us, here, this tea right here is the cause of all your pain and suffering. So we hate these people and we want to hurt them and we want to see them diminished. But they're within this moral protective zone that we have as humans. So slowly over time, we start using words and images of them that dehumanize them, that move them slowly and slowly and slowly into what we call moral exclusion. They no longer are protected by what we believe is human basic rights. And we see the process of dehumanization at the core of every genocide recorded in history. The Nazis used, I think the word is Untermenschen. It's subhuman to describe Jews. Every conflict you can see. And so what's happening in our country right now, from the leadership to the resistance, no one has high ground here. We are slowly allowing ourselves to start using dehumanizing language to describe people with whom we disagree.
Yes.
Which then makes it okay to physically hurt them. And when we use dehumanizing language, it says much more about us than the people that we're railing against. And I think, honestly, it chips away at our soul.
I agree with you 10,000%. That's why this hit me so hard, because I've found myself using language that once I started to make this connection through your work, I was like, it was like these lights came on and I said, oh my God, this is so true. This is so right. So I'm so happy that we're talking about this, because I have never heard anyone talk about this, about dehumanization and rehumanization in a way that we can start to enter these really difficult conversations. And we're going to keep going into that, but to retain our dignity and the humanity for the people that we disagree with.
Yeah, and I think here's the thing. Dehumanization is not a social justice tool.
Yes.
It is emotional offloading. It is gratuitous. It is self-indulgent. It is a way to offload our anger, our fear, and our rage, but it has nothing to do with social justice.
Right.
Everyone take a gentle breath. Settle into the silence of your who, and we'll rest there for just a couple of minutes. Take another gentle, deep breath together and out. We just love to hear what's your one takeaway from this video, this segment. And if we can, I know everyone has one because there's so much packed into those 5 minutes. Just state it briefly so everybody might have a chance to say something.
It reminds me of the 60s, those of us who are old enough to remember the 60s, and the Vietnam War and the demonization that went on between the hawks and the doves. You know, the doves wanted peace, the hawks wanted to win the war militarily, and families were split apart. So to me, this is, the spiral or the circle coming round again, where we're sort of back in a similar place with the splitting up and the demonization of people. And I'm wondering, I don't know enough about history to, I mean, of course, there was, Germany and the Holocaust. So it seems to me as though this is a cyclical event in social terms. And maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's a natural extreme and then the pendulum swings back in the other direction. Those are just my thoughts on it.
Thank you, Jenna. Anyone else? Susie, go ahead.
This brought back such a vivid memory of going on a school trip. I think I was around 8 years old. So that's, we lose our innocence at 8 about politics and our place in the world. And seeing newspapers from generations, years and years and years, demonizing every new group of immigrants coming in and making them into rats or pigs or less than subhuman. So your explanation really brought that memory back in full force of seeing that and being so shocked and disappointed. How could people publish this? I was very innocent.
Diane, please.
The line from the video, dehumanization is not a social justice tool, will stay with me. Very powerful. And it just also made me think how easy it is to slide into self-righteousness. If you believe that your perspective is on the side of social justice, it's very easy to slip into self-righteousness and allow yourself to demonize the people you disagree with and think you're doing that in the name of social justice.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And Roxanne, please go right ahead.
That phrase really struck me. Also, I wrote it down. It is such a gentle, kind, but clear way. If I was in a situation where conversation was, people come together to do good, and then the conversation is degrading into, understandable fear, hurt, disappointment, and exhaustion, that to just put that out there in such a gentle way, I really feel it's really powerful and kind at the same time. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for everyone sharing. I think that it is in this type of dialogue and this type of sharing that we help to grow our own awareness so that we can recognize ourselves. Because I know for me, I've even dehumanized myself, being very violent to myself. And just to be able to say, hey, there it is really the first step, right? And I've been convinced over the years that the things that I see out in the world are things that are in me too, in some maybe small fragment, but they're there, and that's why I see them. For this next segment, I'll try to keep it short because there are two other things I'd like to share after this one. reHumanizing is about abundance and vulnerability. And reHumanizing begins by understanding how scarcity is affecting how we lead. So we've got to learn to engage with vulnerability and recognize, and maybe not the appropriate verb, combat shame. So conversations about vulnerability and shame means we're willing to be uncomfortable, to grow and to go through difficulties, to shine a light inside of those dark corners. And for me, I believe that that's, something that you do as a collective. It's not something that you do by yourself, because fear can crop up there, and to have somebody with you and companion you along those moments of darkness is really, really good. Dehumanizing, we can see it happening all around us. It's not just politics. We see it with parents and their children in the grocery store and at the shopping mall, and how they talk to each other. We see it and hear it with people in restaurants at the adjacent table talking about what group they don't like and how horrible they are. And I have wrestled with a long time with how important it is not to be silent. But at the same time, when I hear these dehumanizing comments in front of me, I'm not always sure about what I can say, or what I should say, or what to say. So perhaps you're like me and not always sure what you should do or say when dehumanizing is happening in your presence. So here's some quotes on silence to help us kind of think about this a little bit. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for that which is right, to stand up for justice. A man dies when he refuses to take a stand for that which is true. Skip that one for now. The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence that by the good people. Silence becomes cowardice when occasion demands speaking out the whole truth and acting accordingly. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Where you see wrong or inequality or injustice, speak out, because this is your country. This is your democracy. Make it, protect it, pass it on. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. And on the other side of this is some wisdom that comes from Francis of Assisi himself, where one of his core principles was that the best argument of the bad is the doing of the better. So for this little segment, if you just take a moment and you can unmute if you'd like, I would just like to hear what you might say or do when you hear dehumanizing happen in your presence. What one thing might you say? No one's jumping at the hand raising because it is a tough question. Michael, please.
I would ask somebody, whoever is doing the dehumanizing, I would ask how they see themselves as a victim of the person or people they are dehumanizing. Like, okay, so this group is doing whatever that you disagree with. How does that make you a victim? How are you harmed? How does that make them worth dehumanizing? I would try to get them to put into words how not only did you not like what was said or done, how did it hurt you? I would like them to label the trespass that they feel. That may not change any minds, but maybe could get them to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Michael. Susie, go right ahead.
Two things come to mind for me. First, I have to feel safe enough to speak to them about it. I've done it in the past for children, held space for the children that might be being mistreated, dehumanized by the adults that are supposed to be taking care of them. And if I talk to someone, an adult, I might say something like, "Wow, you sound so, you have such strong opinions about this. Can you share more?" So that we have a dialogue instead of a confrontation, instead of, well, this is what I think, this is what you think, but in a confrontational way. But as Michael said, I don't know that minds are changed.
Sonia, go right ahead.
Well, and it occurs to me that to open a conversation that could be very challenging is to first really feel compassion for whatever, wherever they're coming from that causes them to feel that dehumanizing attack. As people, they're building themselves up by putting someone else down, which immediately indicates that they have a a low level feeling of their own self-worth. And so the first thing, parents, when you see them, and I've seen this too in malls where they smack their child or yell at them and the child is crazy. And I said, I guess you're having a really hard day. It's tough. Kids are really, really challenging. And how are you? Can I, and so we start off always with compassionately reaching out to touch their human core and reach them on a level that's definitively rehumanizing.
Yeah. I want to try to ask this question again in a different way and see if we can't get a couple of more responses. James Finley, some of you may know him. He was one of my teachers, Christian mystic and contemplative teacher. But he taught me years ago this statement to ask myself the question, what is the most loving thing I can do in this moment? Because it's easy for reflexes to kick in and the shoulders to tighten up and to lash out. And I had another friend that told me, Robert, they can't unhear what you said. So I have tried for quite a long time to build a repertoire of statements that I could say in those cases of hearing dehumanizing in my presence, and what might be the most loving response that I could give. And just as a sample, one of the things for me that came out of that was, what is it that I can say that rehumanizes both the person that said it and the person that they're talking about? So I thought of things along the lines of, I believe that we all have to treat each other with human dignity despite our own opinions. So that I didn't feel like I was countering anything that they said, and that I might in some way plant a seed about what do we want society to look like for us. So what comes to mind for anyone about what you might say that would rehumanize both parties at that same moment? Knowing that you might be planting a seed, you might be watering a seed, you may not be changing any minds in the moment. Dorothy, go ahead.
Thinking back to a few hours ago, first I just want to say I apologize to anybody, young or old, whom I offended with my language. But just to step back and take a little time between what you're feeling and what's happening to get some perspective.
Susie?
So I'll go back to what I said before. If I start a conversation with, wow, I hear that you have strong feelings about this, or that you're passionate about this, or that it's that idea of bringing compassion into the conversation, that if you start out with an empathetic response, it's really hard to be angry at that person during that conversation. So going back to, wow, you have strong feelings about this, can we have a conversation about it? This is how I feel. I'm willing, or I'm interested in hearing how you feel. Might plant seeds for both of us. Yes, thanks for that redirection.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward. But now that we've planted some seeds, as you journal, you can start thinking of things that you might say. I think that for me, doing those role plays by myself is the way that I practice and can feel like that I'm not going to say something out of reflex and response. In this next segment, I wanted to just reflect a little bit about the longer term, how we establish healthy, conscious moral norms. Violence, often begins by making the other less than. And then the violence occurring in the United States, from the Capitol insurrection, what's happened in Seattle, the arrest of 2 Black men at Starbucks, the Muslim ban, and other violence all occurred because an other was demonized in some way. You're not white, you're not Christian, you're not a Democrat or a Republican. So you are less than human, and then I can harm you. And one doesn't have to spend much time on social media to read the plethora of demonizing comments, even among friends. I find it ironic myself. You probably have overheard, you maybe even participated in these discussions at the restaurant or the grocery store or the sporting event. And it's these so-called friendly interpersonal debates that are really the seed ground for the decay of humanity and moral norms. James Baldwin, again, he says, we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. And Walter Wink, a wonderful theologian and minister, said that when we demonize our enemies, calling them names and identifying them with absolute evil, we deny that they have that of God within them. There's that who again, that makes transformation possible. And instead we play God. And I believe that we can establish healthy, conscious moral norms. I actually learned this from the social psychologist, Jonathan Haidt. And there's some wonderful videos out there where he talks on this topic. And then on the personal level, I keep asking myself, what should I be doing or saying and thinking every day to diffuse these types of tension? And I'm so glad to hear about the growing field of bystander training and de-escalation training, because it really hones in on this skill set. Here's some things that Jonathan Haidt says. He says that I think the key for us to all think about the word demonization and to do what we can to tone it down. And that doesn't mean that we have to become centrist. He says that my idea is that we all have more constructive disagreement. So when you hear someone criticize a policy on the other side, that's fine. But when you start hearing motive mongering and demonization, stand up to it, just as you would if you were were someone that was racist or sexist. So there's all these areas that we could work on to improve the situation. And because of time, I'm just going to mention some to plant some seeds. You may think of others. First, for all of us to call each other on it when we demonize other groups, even ourselves, right? Stop attributing bad motives to the other side. Stop thinking that it's happening just out there, right? In the halls of Congress. And we really need to develop a massive groundswell of public revulsion toward demonization. We got to develop some norms that put some pressure on groups, including Congress. Jonathan Haidt goes on, he says that demonizing the other can be rewarded politically because it can make you stronger in the contest within the group. Within the nation, your side can beat the other side if you demonize, but that even makes the nation weaker. The other thing that we can do is stand with the demonized. And I'll just add my tip of the hat here. I think this is one thing that One Spirit does wonderfully in all its programs. I have to say, one of my core teachers, Father Richard Rohr, I know many of you know who he is. He says, we stand with the demonized so the demonizing will stop. We situate ourselves right next to the disposable so that the day will come when we will stop throwing people away. Other things we can do is develop and practice contemplative non-dual consciousness. Another teacher of mine, Cynthia Bourgeot, says that contemplative prayer is no longer a luxury. It's an absolute necessity. We are trying to bring to bear a structure of perception, a system of consciousness that allows us to empathize and relate to each other without fear, without judgment, demonization, or division. And this opens up a whole realm of other questions. And I'm going to share those with you in a way of a document that you can take with you, some other questions for personal reflection later. I do want, we got 5 minutes. So just real quickly, I would like to mention, thank you, David. He put that in the chat, some questions to take with you for self-reflection. Some of the areas that we can work on and that we can learn from is the areas of shadow work, abundance mentality, the bystander and de-escalation training, peacemaking, learning the art of nonviolence, self-love and compassion. You know, it doesn't always have to be a response to the single incident. What is it we can do in the longer term that helps people recreate a culture where demonizing isn't part of it, dehumanizing isn't part of it? So if you have something that you think falls into that realm, what other type of practice can we do? What other type of training can we engage in? Go to One Spirit classes, I'll say that. Anyone else? Sonia, go ahead.
One of the things I'm a Buddhist, and I'm not sure, I'm guessing other contemplatives practice the equivalent of Tonglen.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to learn because hopefully I'll go to seminary starting in the fall. That's my plan. I'm working on that application. But I've gone deep into Tibetan Buddhism, and it's such a very, very beautiful practice of taking and giving, and you do within a meditative practice, but it's a heart-opening exercise. So for all living beings, not just humans actually, but all creatures as well, to see them all with the same Buddha nature, every living being.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that makes a very excellent point. There's probably things that you're doing right now that you didn't recognize were contributing to that higher goal, right? That's how spirit works, I think, sometimes, right? Get you engaged in it. Roxanne?
One really long-term practice is to think about the stories that we tell in our homes and to our friends. Because a lot of times we repeat bad examples of what upsets us, and it would be really helpful to, like you said, to get healthy, conscious moral norms.
Mm-hmm.
If we tell the good stories, so that seems like the norm, so that when someone comes away from that, it seems weird, and they don't see that as their first choice. But we have to, tell those stories over and over again and expand the good in our storytelling to each other, adults to children to anybody.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah, constantly reminding people of their inherent goodness. Well, thank you, friends. We have 2 minutes. I do want to close with a song because it is be an agent of good. Yes, be an agent of good. It is our tradition at One Spirit to close with a song. So I will lead into the song with this, that it is through the eyes of love that we rehumanize. So enjoy this song sung by Paul Isaac titled The Eyes of Love.
This song is called Eyes of Love. Remind us to look through the eyes of love, into the eyes of love, dropping all labels, seeing someone for who they truly are, an authentic being of light. We're all part of this beautiful mystery. We all have our own unique stories in this. But if we can drop the stories and truly see someone and offer that love, that's really where it's at. How many lifetimes have I spent searching for something that can't be explained, for something that can't be tamed? Searching for someone to show me the way, tell me that it's okay to work through my suffering. So I look within, find myself anew. Let the light shine through in all the things that I do. If darkness should fall, I'll call upon this light. Remember my heart was touched when I felt the shock deep rush. As I look into the eyes of love, I look into the eyes of love. I look into the eyes of love. I look into the eyes of love. My heart is open, but there is more to come. More less to this mind, more work to be done. The masks I wear are slowly peeling off, 'cause there's no need to hide from this truth inside. A seed's been planted and this tree will grow, and the fruits that I sow will surely feed the soul. So my friend, I am done waiting. Yes, I'm here now, and I surrender. As I look into the eyes of love, I look into the eyes of love. I look into the eyes of love. Yes, I look into the eyes of love. And now I'm looking through the eyes of love. Oh yes, I'm looking through the eyes of love. And all I see, I'm looking through. I'm looking through. Looking through. Looking through the eyes of love into the eyes of love.
Well, thank you. I'll put your viewer into gallery view and look at all the eyes of love.
Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Robert.
and all for sharing.
Robert.
Yes, thank you.
Good to be with you all.
Right. Have a great evening, everybody.